Loops are control structures that allow you to repeat a block of code multiple times. They are incredibly useful for performing repetitive tasks and implementing game mechanics and animation. In C#, there are three primary types of loops: for, while, and do while. Let's start by creating a script file in Unity Editor and name it loops. Attach the file to a game object. Let's attach it to the camera game object. Select the camera game object to ensure that the script is attached to it. Double-click the file to open it in Visual Studio. The for loop is commonly used when you know the number of iterations in advance. The for loop syntax is for, and then between parentheses we put the initialization part, then semicolon, the condition, then semicolon, and the iteration part, and then we close the parentheses. Then we have the opening and closing curly brackets. In between them, we'll have the code that will be executed repeatedly inside the for loop. Through the initialization, you declare a control variable and assign to it an initial value that the loop will start with. Then we have the condition that is checked before each iteration. If it is evaluated to false, the loop stops. The iteration is an expression that gets executed at the end of each iteration. It is often used to update the control variable. In this example, the int I equals 0 part initializes a variable called I and set its initial value to 0. This is like saying, let's start counting from 0. I smaller than 5 is the condition that checks whether I is less than 5. As long as this condition is true, the loop will continue. In this case, the loop will run as long as it's less than 5. I++ is the iteration part. After each iteration of the loop, the value of I is incremented by 1. It's like saying, after each count, let's go to the next number. In this case, I will be 0 at the first iteration, 1 at the second iteration, 2 at the third iteration, 3 at the fourth iteration, and finally 4 at the final and fifth iteration. The debug.log line of code is executed in each iteration of the loop. It prints the message iteration followed by the value of I. For example, in the first iteration, it will print iteration 0. In the second iteration, it will print iteration 1, and so on. So, when we run this code, it will execute the debug.log line 5 times because the loop runs until I is no longer less than 5. Each time it runs, it will print the message iteration followed by the current value of I, starting from 0 and going up to 4. Let's save the file and go back to the Unity editor. Click the play button. Check the console. Notice that the output will be from 0 to 4 because the for loop iterated through the number 0 to 4, which is less than 5, which is the condition that terminated the loop. The while loop is useful when you want to repeat a block of code until a certain condition is no longer true. The while loop syntax is while and then a condition between two parentheses, then opening and closing curly brackets, and in between the code that will be executed repeatedly. In this example, the loop will print counter 0 and continue until reaching to counter 4 in the Unity console. Notice the similarities with the for loop syntax. We issued a variable earlier, which is the equivalent to the initialization part of the for loop. The while loop has a condition that is equivalent to the for loop condition. Also, at the end of the code inside the while block, we are increasing the value of the counter at each iteration. This is equivalent to the iteration part in the for loop. Finally, we have the do while loop. It is similar to the while loop, but executes the code block at least once before checking the condition. The syntax of the do while loop is do, then open and closing curly brackets, and in between the code to be executed repeatedly, and this code will be executed at least once before reaching the while condition. After the closing curly bracket, we will have the while and the condition between two parentheses and a semicolon at the end. In this example, the loop will print number 0 and continues up till number 4 in the Unity console. Loops are versatile and can be nested within each other or combined with conditional statements to create more complex logic. They are commonly used to iterate through arrays and lists and perform repetitive actions in game development. Remember to be cautious when using loops to avoid infinite loops, which are loops that never terminate, by ensuring that the condition will eventually become false.